And I can say this with certainty, that will really, really help you actually get the high grades that you want when it comes to your exams. Hi everyone, my name is Rhoda and I'm a doctor working in the UK, and today I really want to talk about note taking and the way in which I took my notes when I was at university and beyond, because I still had a few exams during my postgraduate training, and I thought let's go through some of the techniques that really helped me get good results in my exams, and hopefully you'll find this useful. Personally, note taking did not form the bulk of my study process, which may seem a little bit surprising, but I found that my note taking was the least important thing when it came to the overall way in which I was approaching my learning. So imagine note taking is like the skeleton, and everything else that goes around it, like the skin, the muscles, the tissue, is like the active learning. So for example, doing questions, doing past papers, practice tests. This may be flashcards for other people, or explaining it to yourself or to other people. Those actually form the more relevant and more significant parts of like your study process. So a little bit of a disclaimer, there is no perfect way to take notes, and everyone's style is completely different. All of our brains are wired differently. Anyway, the ideal note-taking system is one that is organized and one that is laid out in a way that makes sense to you. So I've split this video into 4 parts that kind of correlate with how I was approaching my note-taking. And the first is preview, the second is engage, third is the actual note-taking, and then fourth is review. So let's get into it. So the first one is preview, and what I mean by that is before I've even put pen to paper, before I've even started taking any notes, I really want to get an idea of what the content is going to be about. What is it that I'm actually taking notes on? So I want to get a general overview, like scope it out a little bit to see what is it that I need to know. So this literally involves me skim reading the content for a couple of minutes, just having a look, what sticks out to me, what is it that I need to know. It really helps me get a lay of the land without me diving headfirst into note taking. I felt as though it used to help me prime my brain and kind of get acclimatized to what the themes of the content were going to be about. And at this point, I'll highlight or circle or underline anything that stands out to me. That may either be the subheadings, anything that's in bold, anything that's underlined, and that tends to be the most relevant information anyway, and may even be the stuff that comes up in exams most frequently. So this is what's called inspectional reading, and it's literally just skim reading the content and looking at the main points of the information and also figuring out what are the things that you need to know. Use an example and just pretend that I'm going to be learning about something called ulcerative colitis, which is a inflammatory condition that affects the large bowel. So imagine if I've never seen this topic before and I want to start taking notes on it. So the first thing I'll do is, like I said, I'll just go through it. And this doesn't matter if it's a textbook, if it's lecture notes, if it's online material, the principle still remains the same. So I'm having a look at the condition. So I'm literally just having a look. So I can see here, there's things about diagnosis, investigation, differential diagnosis. I can see here that clearly there must be some correlation with fertility and pregnancy. Have a look what the definitions are. Apparently there are complications with the condition. There are extra-intestinal manifestations, which basically means symptoms outside the digestive system. And that is without me even having looked at the actual main bulk of the text. And then I'll just start kind of scrolling through this and just have a look what stands out to me, so I can see, how do you diagnose it? I can see here that in terms of diagnosis, you need to do certain blood tests. And, the information goes on and on and on. And that is inspectional reading. 2 is what I like to call engage. And that is, now that I've read it and I've kind of done the skim reading, I really want to get a bit of a deeper understanding of what the material is about. This is a point where I like to start asking myself questions and try and turn it into like an active process whereby I'm really trying to engage with the source material. Like I'm trying to form connections with what I already know, because chances are whatever you're looking at, there's always something that you know about it already, and trying to connect it with what I need to know. What I like to do is always look at the subheadings and almost turn it into a question. I'll ask myself, what is ulcerative? What is a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis? And then the answer is whatever text comes beneath the subheading. So by turning it into like a question and answer situation, it turns the reading from not just being a passive thing into something that is actually active, where I'm trying to form these connections. My note-taking becomes much more purposeful because I'm trying to answer questions rather than just me copying things word for word. Number 3 is the actual note-taking part of it. So the thing I like to get out of the way is the age-old dilemma of handwriting or typing on a laptop. Personally, I found that handwriting is much more effective and helps me remember things much better, and because of how slow I'm writing, it really helps my brain to like comprehend things as I'm writing it down, as opposed to me using a laptop, because I'm naturally a fast typer anyway. So for me, it just ends up being me just copying things word for word, and it becomes like a transcribing exercise. And there is actually a lot of evidence to suggest that handwriting actually promotes better comprehension as opposed to typing on a computer. But, you know, it may not work for you. You may actually find that typing for you is much better, and that's absolutely fine as well. Note taking, I also like to date my notes, and that's for 2 reasons. One is it helps me track my progress, and it tends to correspond with my revision timetable. Covered a certain topic, I now can figure out when I need to revisit it again. And that's where the space repetition comes into it. Because guys, you can't just take notes one time and then just forget about it. We have to keep revisiting the information through active means, which is questions, flashcards, practice papers, etc., etc. So the next thing is paraphrasing. And I'm really trying to put a lot of effort into trying to put the information into my own words. So in that way, it kind of helps, it corresponds with my mental framework, and I decide how the information is presented to me in my head. I found that by using my own commonly used language and making it like personal to me, that really helped me with remembering the information much better and understanding it much better as well. So paraphrasing the information rather than just copying it word for word really goes a long way. And that kind of brings me to the next point, which is summarizing. In summarizing, I really try and make sure to include all the keywords that's in the material and actually cutting out all the filler words. So in that way, I'm making my notes much more efficient and they're much more high yield as well. And again, I love my evidence-based things. Summarizing actually promotes deeper processing as opposed to just writing things down blindly. Because if you imagine, you're basically turning information and distilling it down into like key concepts. So that actually helps you figure out whether you've understood something as well if you can summarize it. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is don't do too much summarization. And I've fallen into this before, where you end up literally with this like cryptic piece of information that you can't even figure out what you wrote when you're like, you know, going back on it a couple of months time. The next one is avoid like blocks of text. So what I mean by blocks of text is like you've got an A4 piece, you know, you've got your A4 notebook, and then from the top to the end, there's just a wall of text and there's no breaks in it whatsoever. What I always used to do was break down the text into paragraphs, so like into different subsections, depending on what the different topics were. And that way it looks more visually appealing because it's some variety when it comes to like your notes. And secondly, when it comes to revisiting my notes, I can quickly see where I've written things if I want to refer back to it. And that brings me on to my next point, which is kind of spicing up the notes a little bit. So by using like images, drawings, if you're very good at drawing, any sort of diagram that kind of breaks up that text. So for me, I always used to like using things like flowcharts or flow diagrams, especially for information that was really detailed. There was a lot of information that I had to kind of break down into smaller pieces. So I always love using flowcharts when it comes to, for example, stepwise management of conditions. And in that way, you can, when you're having a look at it, you can see it in its more simpler parts, and it helps me cement it into my mind's eye. And I actually found, you know, when it came to exam time, that I could almost visualize the diagram in my head, and sometimes I could even pick out certain bits to it. I'm like, yes, now I've remembered it. Next one is try and leave space for additional notes. That may be in the margins, that may be leaving a few lines after each topic, that type of thing. Because I always found that once I've done a few questions or like practice papers, there was always something I wanted to add or underline or really emphasize. So just leaving a bit of space to add some extra notes is really helpful as well. And that brings me on to the last section of the video, which is review. So I've done all of my reading, I've done all of my note taking, and I really want to make sure at this point that what I've written down actually makes sense. And whether I've actually understood the information I've written down as well, which is really important. What I'll do is I'll literally just skim read through all my notes again. And I'm not just passively rereading at this point, I'm literally speaking out loud. I'll ask the question, I'll be like, Rhoda, what is ulcerative colitis? And then I'll be like, right, it's this and this and that. And it doesn't matter if I don't remember every single piece of detail. At this point, it's just making sure that have I understood like the general gist of the information I'm trying to learn. Literally speaking out loud and explaining it to an imaginary person or like an imaginary class already starts the ball rolling for the actual active learning part of the study process. So I've done all of that, and now I'm going to be doing, I'll set aside an hour or so to start doing some questions, even if it's a little quiz at the back of the textbooks, anything that basically tests you. So the more questions you do, the more likely you'll know whether you've understood all the information that you've got on hand. Whew. Okay, so that was a lot. So I think we'll just recap what I've just talked about. So the first is preview, and that is where you're literally just skim reading the information and trying to get a lay of the land and make sure that you know what you actually need to know. Second is engage, where you're actively trying to understand the information as much as possible. Third is the actual note-taking part of the process. Fourth is always making sure that you review the notes that you have taken. And once you've done all of that, you can now crack on with the actual active learning part of it, which is the most important and the most crucial part of making sure that you've remembered things and can understand it. And I can say this with certainty, that will really, really help you actually get the high grades that you want when it comes to your exams. Guys, that is everything I've got to say today. If you found this useful or even remotely helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.